Hi, my name is Jan Wilczek from WolfSound.com. Welcome to WolfTalk, a podcast about audio programming. In this podcast, you'll learn how to build your career in programming or research related to audio, meet programmers and researchers from all around the world, and learn about the intricacies of sound. Hi everyone, and welcome to the 31st episode of the WolfTalk podcast. And today, I have a very special guest for you, namely Timur Doumler. Timur is a very special guest of the show for a variety of reasons. He's an audio programming consultant. He was a developer of the JUCE C++ framework, the largest framework in the audio community, and also the sponsor of the podcast. Timur is a frequent speaker, not only at the Audio Developer Conference, but also major C++ conferences. He's a co-founder of an audio plugin company called Cradle. He hosts the CPPcast podcast, the first podcast on C++. And what is the most exciting to me is that Timur is also a member of the C++ Standard Committee. But the list goes on and on. So let's get to the interview as soon as possible. Just let me mention that all the people, places, and references mentioned in this podcast episode can be found in the episode notes at dwolfsound.com/talk031. Once again, it's dwolfsound.com/talk031. And now, Timur Doumler. Hi, Timur. Thanks for agreeing on this interview. Could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi. Thank you for having me on your show. So my name is Timur Doumler. I've been doing lots of different things that have to do with C++ for the last 16 years. And for the majority of this time, I also worked on things that have to do with music production software in one way or another, although not so much in the last few years. My background is in astrophysics, although that I haven't been doing for a very long time. I'm a member of the ISO C++ Standards Committee. I sometimes give talks at conferences. That's. I think that's it for now. We can dig into things later if you want to know more.
Yeah, you sometimes give talks. That's a good one. So I think it's super interesting. How did your interest in music start? Were you also playing a musical instrument?
Yeah. So I was born in the Soviet Union in the 80s, and what happens there is that a lot of parents, they just kind of insist that their child is playing a musical instrument. So I got to play the violin from a very young age. At some point later, also piano. And then when I was like 14, 15, I at some point said, screw that. I don't want to do that anymore. But I couldn't really do nothing that has to do with music. So instead, I picked up the guitar and then later the bass and played in a bunch of different bands. And I still do that occasionally. So it's still a hobby of mine.
Okay, and did this somehow led you into this interest of, audio processing, this audio plugin ecosystem, etc.?
It kind of did because, I was kind of doing astrophysics and learning how to code and doing other things. But then also I had this big hobby of making music kind of on the side. And then I think when I decided I want to leave academia and become a developer, and at the time I was, as I still am, pretty excited about C++, and I really wanted to become a C++ developer. And I was just looking around, like, is there any industry that uses C++? And then I found out that, it's very popular in music tech. And I was instantly hooked because a lot of, plugins I was already using, like, for example, when I was like recording guitar, I was using Native Instruments Guitar Rig a lot at the time. So, that's naturally why I applied first. And that's where I got my first job. So definitely there is this kind of connection that I always had this interest in music. And I suddenly saw that you could combine music and, writing software. So that's kind of how I got sucked in. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. But before you did that, as you said, you studied computational astrophysics. And, it seems pretty difficult from the name. But why did you choose this study path? And where did you study?
Right. So I come from a family of scientists, so I think my parents just pre-decided that I had to be a scientist too. And I picked initially physics because I just wanted to understand how the world works, and physics was a pretty good way of doing that. And then at some point, you had to like specialize what kind of physics you want to do. Do you want to do like solid state physics or, whatever, cryophysics? And I was a massive Star Trek fan at the time. And I also just wanted to kind of know like the answers to all the big questions, like how big is the universe? How old is the universe? What shape is the universe? Is it infinite or not? Where does it come from? And is it realistic to like travel to a different galaxy or whatever? So I really wanted to know the answers to that. And I guess that's why I studied astrophysics, because I wanted to know. And then cosmology is kind of the branch of astrophysics that really focuses on this big picture, like the universe as a whole, as opposed to, stars or planets. And I studied physics in Berlin, which is where I grew up, at the Free University. And then I did a PhD, which was split between Lyon, which is in France, and Potsdam, which is in Germany.
Okay, awesome. And were you already using C++ in your studies, or then when you were pursuing a PhD?
All right, so that's a fun story. So when I started working there, basically I kind of quickly got sucked into kind of numeric cosmology, because at some point when you're trying to figure out how galaxies form and things like that, you just can't do that theoretically, mathematically.
Okay, you need to run simulations then.
Yeah. So you run so you look at the telescope and then you run simulations and you see if you get the same thing out that you see on the sky, right? And so all of the simulations is code that's running, and so I was just running them, and at some point we wanted to like look into something that the code wasn't doing. So my master thesis was about like how do magnetic fields influence galaxy formation, and like the code didn't do that, and so somebody needed to go in and add some more equations to this code, and nobody wanted to do that. And I was like, okay, this is reasonably interesting. I'd never coded before, but whatever. So this is kind of how I got into programming, kind of more or less accidentally. And it was all C and Fortran, and it was very painful. Like nobody in that field at the time knew any other programming language but C and Fortran. And also that's albeit what we're taught in uni. There was like a numerics class in uni, but that was all just Fortran and C. And the caveat is, if you use Fortran, we're gonna tell you if you did it right. If you use C, we don't understand C, so we'll just run your code and tell you if it's correct, and that's it. So that was uni, and then in kind of actual research, it was again C and Fortran. And at some point, when I moved on to my PhD, and I kind of started my own software project there for a particular research project, I just figured out that I just can't write it in C or Fortran because it's just a spaghetti code. It's just completely unmaintainable. It's just not good. I mean, I guess you can write good C as well, but that's not what people were doing at the time. And so, I just decided I'm going to write my project in C++, and everybody said, this is crazy. Like, this is like the stuff with classes. Nobody needs classes here. We're just dealing with numbers, and nobody's going to understand your code because nobody knows C++. And I did it anyway. And then halfway through, I figured out writing C++ is a lot more fun than all of this like research and writing research papers. And I don't want to do that anymore. Let me just go and, become a C++ developer. So I finished my PhD and then just kind of left and started looking for a job as a C++ developer.
Okay. And before we transition into this, I was just curious, like, why did you want to do a PhD? Was it because, you found the topic interesting, or, was it this interest in general in doing research?
That's a good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me this, but let's talk about this. So I think, I finished my I think nowadays it's more like bachelor and then undergraduate and graduate. Back then it was like master and then PhD, kind of in Germany. It's slightly differently. So I finished my master thesis and then you get like a degree. So I could have gone and worked somewhere else then, but I kind of just wasn't sure. I think because like my entire family are scientists, and I was like, well, maybe I want to become a scientist still. So I guess a PhD is something you need if you want to work in science. And I was like, okay, this gives me another 3 years to figure out if I actually want to do this, right? So I'm kind of just, instead of jumping ship now, I might, this kind of research thing is interesting. So, I might end up doing it or not. I don't know, but I'll just do this PhD. So I have 3 more years to like figure out if academia is what I want to do with my life. And turned out it wasn't, but I think it was, I don't regret doing it. I think I learned a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you learn that you don't want to do research for the rest of your life, then that's a valuable thing, I believe.
Yeah, but it was kind of path of least resistance at the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I hear this quite often. I believe it's a good reason on its own, and you know, if people find it fun, then why not?
I was toying with the idea of applying. I think at Ableton it would have been at the time. I think I bumped into some Ableton people somewhere. I was toying with the idea of applying, like just after the master's, not doing the PhD and applying there, but then I didn't. And then I applied at NI instead, like 3 years later.
Okay, yeah, let's move to this topic then. I'm really curious of what were you doing at NI, but is there any particular story of how you got there? Because I imagine there are a lot of people now who are like, I want to get to native instruments. How do I do it?
Right. So the year was 2012. So I basically just decided I want to do C++ and I want to do music software. So those were the parameters. And I was living in Berlin at the time, and I think I was a little bit too young still to consider just permanently moving somewhere else for a job. I had just moved around a lot for my PhD, which was partially in France. I was kind of sick of that. I wanted to just stay in Berlin. And so in Berlin, there were 2 big companies at the time, NI and Ableton. And so I had some contacts. I had a beer with an Ableton guy, and he said, yeah, we're not really looking for developers right now. We're not hiring right now. So I applied at NI. That was basically the one place I wanted to go then at the time. And yeah, it took them a while to get back to me. I applied there in June 2012. And then in, I think, September 2012, my like contract with like the Astrophysics Institute expired. And that was the hard cutoff. After September, I don't have any money anymore to pay my rent. So then, you know, in August, September, I started poking them like, hey, you still haven't replied to my job application, which I sent you 3 months ago. And then, they were like, oh, yeah, okay, let's schedule like an interview. Like, are you free tomorrow? And I was like, yes. And yeah. I ended up being there for 2.5 years at Native Instruments. It was good. Do you want me to talk about what I was?
Yeah. I'm really interested in what you were working on, and frankly, if you ended up working on the plugins that you had been using previously.
Right. So not quite. So I obviously was very interested in Guitar Rig because that was the main plugin I was using every day at the time for like my hobby music stuff. They were not particularly like investing a lot in that product at the time. Like they were not hiring like to have more people work on that. But also what I ended up doing then, so I interviewed with a bunch of teams. I ended up spending the first 2 years in a team called the library team. So I ended up basically working on what was called NI Libs at the time. I don't know if it's still called that, which is kind of the foundational C++ libraries that that are used everywhere, like the string class and the thread class and like the basic like GUI library and the basic like plugin wrapper, kind of like what JUCE is, but just kind of an internal version of that. I think a lot of the bigger companies have that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's my impression too. My impression too.
Any company that started doing this stuff in the 90s, like the standard library was crap. And like you had to just do it yourself and nothing else was available. JUCE wasn't really as much of a thing yet. So everybody just, developed their own in-house version of that. And so that's kind of what I ended up working on for 2 years. Then, that was interesting. I learned a lot about basically just basic C++ there. And then after this, I switched to the Contact team. So I worked on Contact for just about half a year. So that was the release of Contact 5.5. So that was the release where I put a lot of work into that one. And then, after that experience, I moved on for a number of reasons that don't necessarily have to do with the company or my job, but it was kind of time to move on. Also, I wanted to live in a different country for a bunch of unrelated reasons. I wanted to kind of leave Germany, and so I moved on to a different job.
Okay, and I'm really just curious, since this was your first audio programming job after you left academia. So can you remember still, could you share a little bit, what was your transition? How did it feel? What did you have to kind of learn on the job? What surprised you, especially when it comes to audio programming, which I feel is, different than writing computational code, right?
Oh, well, so actually that's interesting because the audio stuff felt the most familiar.
Okay.
It's like the if you're doing like computational hydrodynamics versus like DSP is kind of the same. It's like Fourier transform, like the math is the same. It's just like 3D and versus 1D. But like that felt very familiar very instantly. Like the fact that you sample things and then you have all of these like numeric effects and artifacts and you have to, do this and do that and you have to filter. It's exactly the same. That felt very familiar. But everything else was very, very new. Like in academia, you really learn how to code. You don't really like learn any tools for that. Like you have it. I mean, maybe now they're better at it. Back then it was like you have a text editor and maybe you have Git. That's it. So I had to learn how to use an IDE, how to use a debugger, how to use CI, how to code review, what coding guidelines people have who actually know how to do this. Like, how do you write code in a way that you actually care about that code being able to be maintained and read still like a year from later? Like in academia, that's not really something people think about, right? They need to, write a certain amount of papers, get their project done. So they just put that together, run the simulation, move on, right? So, but like developing code sustainably and developing code in a team of people rather than just on your own, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And that was all completely new for me. So that was very, very interesting.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting to see how it changed because now I feel like when you get to a company, you're kind of expected, to know how Git works, a little bit how the code review process works and how design patterns work, structures, etc. I'm not saying that you didn't know these things when you were starting out, but it seems like you had this nice opportunity to also learn a little bit on the job. While I feel today it's more strict in this regard, but maybe that's just my impression.
I did not know these things. I think maybe today I just wouldn't have gotten a job anywhere. Like that's probably quite likely. I think I kind of, before the interview, I read Scott Meyer's book about effective C++, and I knew a little bit about like what not to do when you write C++ code, but that was pretty much it. I certainly did not know anything about, tools that you use nowadays or, I had no idea what a unit test was or anything like that. Or I'd never used a debugger in my life, right? So yeah, I probably wouldn't have gotten the job today, but back then I did. So that was good.
And I think we should be happy for this because otherwise the C++ world would look differently. Let's pause here for a moment. I can spoil that in the next question, I am asking Timur about his work at ROLI, where he worked on the JUCE C++ framework. What is JUCE about? It is an open source, cross-platform C++ application development framework that makes it easy to create audio software as well as audio plugins and plugin hosts. You can write code once and build VST, AU, AUV3, AAX, and LV2 plugins on Windows, macOS, iOS, Android, and Linux, as well as embedded platforms. I've been successfully using JUCE since 2018, both in my private and professional projects, so I'm delighted that they're sponsoring the podcast. I especially like how JUCE makes it easy for beginners to jump right into creating audio plugins and applications without worrying about C++ quirks. JUCE is used by the majority of the world's most important audio companies, but it is free for personal use and there is affordable pricing available for companies just starting out. Apart from the framework itself, JUCE has an amazing community of users gathered in the JUCE forum, which is a great resource to learn audio programming on its own. With the release of JUCE version 8, you can even use web technologies to create your plugin UIs. To start using JUCE now, go to juice.com, download JUCE, and follow their Getting Started guide. I have also put a link to it in the description. Have fun creating audio apps and plugins. And now, back to the interview with Timur. Okay, but then you moved on, you went to work at ROLI. So Can you describe the transition and what were your duties there?
So I moved to ROLI. I wanted to do something else. I wanted to also move to a different country and like that. So I moved to the UK for the job. And also I had met Julian Storer. I had met him at a meetup. And I just I don't know, we just got along really well. I was like, okay, this guy, like, I think I want to work with him. I'm just going to learn so much from just sitting next to this guy and like letting him review my code and look at what I'm doing. This is an amazing learning opportunity. Like, he seems to know what he's doing. So, and it kind of coincided with JUCE being bought by ROLI, and they like basically Jules was like looking into hiring like the first person who isn't Jules to work on JUCE, because they just decided that they're going to make a team out of it, because before then it was just him. And so I kind of talked him into hiring me somehow, and that was good. So I worked on JUCE directly for some time, and then I also internally worked at a few other products there, like blocks, this kind of little like devices, like controllers that you can click together with magnets, and you can use them as like fun little like controllers. And Noise, which was like the app at the time, the mobile app. So I worked on a bunch of stuff there.
Okay, and can you share maybe, because I think out of these, JUCE is the most famous one. Can you still remember, or can you say on which JUCE features have you worked on?
Right. So that was 2015, 2016 now. So there was just a lot of like kind of maintenance work and like adding little things here and there. But I think the one big thing I did was I wrote an implementation of MPE, which is that still a thing? I think now we have MIDI 2.0, which does everything better, right? But like back then it was MPE. Like, how do you do polymorphic expression? MPE was the answer. I basically wrote the reference implementation for that in C++, which was part of JUCE then. And I also wrote an implementation for OSC, Open Sound Control for JUCE, which had been missing until then. Those, I think, were like the two big things I did. And lots of other stuff that I just don't remember now.
Okay, awesome. And do you still remember kind of the biggest things that you learned yourself on the job as an audio developer?
I think I learned a lot about how operating systems work and how plugin interfaces work, because that's kind of what JUCE kind of abstracts away. So you have to like write a lot of the glue code. And so I think I learned a lot about, just these kind of OS interfaces and plugin SDKs and typical bugs that people have. I learned a lot, as I thought I would, from Jules about how to write really good, clean C++ code and how to write like good libraries. I also, so they, after hiring me, they also hired, or kind of at the same time, they also hired Fabian and Jules. So we were working closely together, and I learned a lot from Fabian about how like actual computers actually work. Not just kind of the theory and the programming language, but what actually happens, why do you get a crash here? Like, so that was great.
Also wanted to ask, because you mentioned, and I think Fabian also did, the kind of approach to writing code that's, maintainable and it's nice to work with. So can you name any rules, any practices that kind of stayed with you? I know a lot of this can be subconscious, but I'm just curious if there are specific things you can name.
Well, one big thing that I really embraced was test-driven development. I think that definitely changed how I code, like forever. Like nowadays, I always start with a test, and I write the code that I want to work first, and then I figure out how to make it work. And that, I think, changed everything for me. I don't really know how to write code any other way nowadays. That was a big thing. What else? Just kind of trying to understand what's actually going on, but also then trying to find like the simplest possible way to express like what you need to do, right? Don't overthink stuff.
Okay, I understand. Yeah. And I think it's still an ongoing learning for me. So as you mentioned, you then went on, or at that time, please clarify, you co-founded Cradle. So can you share what this company is about?
So not quite. This is not the order in which things were happened.
Okay.
What happened was I burned out, and I then took half a year off, and I was kind of just traveling around and backpacking the world and did not look at a computer screen for half a year, basically. then I joined JetBrains, and I was working there as a developer. And I did that for about 2 years, and then I started Cradle after that.
Okay, so then maybe let's move to JetBrains then, to stay kind of in this chronological order. So why did you want to go there, and what were you working on there?
So I wanted to go there because I kind of needed a break from, I guess, the music industry. Also, they had at the time an office in St. Petersburg, which is where I'm from. Like nowadays, they don't have an office there anymore, but at the time they did. So I kind of wanted to spend some time there because it's kind of where I'm from. But, we moved away from there when I was still a child. So I didn't really get to, live in the country where I'm from as an adult. So I wanted to do that. So I moved to Russia actually for a year and lived there. That was back in 2018. And yeah, I also kind of just JetBrains, they had these booths like everywhere I went to the conferences, and they were talking about their tools. And I just really had embraced all their tools, and I was using Lyon and lots of their other stuff. And I was just a really big fan. And I wanted to see what is it like to kind of, work outside the music tech industry. And so I just, at some point, I was at a conference in 2017, and I just approached them. Hey guys, like, do you have jobs? Like, I really like what you do, and I'm kind of looking for a new job. I kind of had this half a year break now. I'm kind of looking to do some coding again. Like, do you have a job? Like, I know C++ pretty well. And they were like, yeah, sure. And they hired me. So yeah, that was that. And then, yeah, I spent a lot of time I rewrote half of their C++ parser, which was fun, which is actually written in Java. So they had like this whole C++ front end, but written in Java. And I did a lot of work on that. That was fun. I think that's when I got to learn all the stuff that you normally learn when you study computer science, except I didn't study computer science, like data structures, algorithms, like parsers, all of this classic kind of stuff that I just had to learn on a job there. That was a lot of fun.
Okay, yeah. I can imagine. And how was writing Java in comparison to C++?
So that was really fun because I had no idea that, I knew that the company kind of started out with IntelliJ, which is like a Java IDE. I had no idea that their entire code base was written in Java. Nowadays it's also Kotlin, which is the language they developed. And I think they have a lot more going on nowadays. But back then, like, almost everything was Java. And so they actually kind of just said that, like, I think at my job interview, I was interviewing for, like, I was physically in the job interview to get hired there. And then, I don't know, we were chatting about some C++ stuff. And then the guy was just saying, oh, by the way, you will be writing Java because that's what we use. And I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, have you ever used Java before? And I was like, no, I haven't. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. You'll figure it out. And so I did. It turned out Java is actually really pleasant to write. Like if you've done C and C++ and Fortran, then Java is like really easy. Like it was kind of this thing where like I just type what I want to do and it just happens. Like there's no compiler errors that I have to like understand. There's no weird like template instantiation failures that I have to figure out. Like none of that, right? You just write code and it just works. And I think for a while I was just really panicking about because you have to write new all the time, like new this, new that. And I was like, oh no, this is wrong. This is an allocation. I can't do that. I can't do that. And then, it took me maybe a couple of months to realize, no, it's fine. It's all right. The GVM will take care of it. Don't worry. And yeah, from then on, I would say after a couple of months, it was like really smooth. Like it was very, very easy to learn.
Okay, nice. I read that Java was especially designed in this way to enable an easy transition for C++ developers. So the syntax is very similar. And I think then what you're saying is a living proof that it actually works. Yeah,
I can confirm. If you don't care so much about when allocations happen or whatever, which is kind of the stuff you care about when you do audio, then Java is a pleasure to work with. It's kind of maybe nowadays, I would say, like it's very stuck in this kind of object-oriented way of doing things, which coming from JUCE was very natural to me because JUCE is also written in that way. Like nowadays, I wouldn't necessarily write code this way anymore. But like, if you're coming from that kind of mindset, then that was because actually JUCE, funny enough, was originally designed by Jules. I think you will find this old quote somewhere, like to be something like Java for C++, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, it was a very smooth transition, I would say.
Okay, I understand. So maybe to wrap up this JetBrains topic, I know that you then went on to become a developer advocate at JetBrains. And can you maybe explain why this happened and what is a developer advocate?
So I'm going to mess with you now because the chronology is as follows. I left ROLI, took some time off, then joined JetBrains as a developer, then left JetBrains to start Cradle, did that for 3 years, and then left Cradle to rejoin JetBrains as a developer advocate.
Okay.
So that's what happened. And yeah, that was fun. At that point in my life, I just kind of really needed a break from coding in general. Or from basically writing production code and this whole churn of releases and deadlines and being responsible for stuff, and which I had done, at Cradle, which, was great. Like, it's probably the best place I can imagine for that kind of stuff. But I just really wanted to take a break from like developing software altogether. And so I wanted to go somewhere where I can do things kind of at my own pace, things that are more like educational, community stuff. And not so much, we need to release products. And so developer advocate was a good role for that. So a developer advocate is basically a kind of a liaison between a company's products and the external developer community. And it's especially for products that are developer facing, like JetBrains obviously has that. And so on the one hand, you kind of teach people how to use the product. So which requires you to actually be, you're not a salesman. It's not about that. It's like you kind of have to already be very passionate about the product, which I was and still am. I still use C-Line as my IDE of choice. I think it's the best IDE on the market. So you kind of have to be passionate about the product, and then you kind of teach people how to use it. So it's a lot of content creation. You create tutorial videos, you create blog posts, you create conference talks. I also worked on like a learning plugin. It's kind of thing where you open the IDE and it kind of takes you through some lessons, like how you do this, how do you do that, how does auto-completion work, and whatever. So that kind of educational stuff, but also kind of you do the other thing. You like the flip side of that is you listen to what the community wants. You hang out in community spaces. You go to meetups. You listen to what developers want, what they're struggling with, what features they're missing, what they're doing when they're using somebody else's products, for example. And then you feed all of that back to the team. So that requires you to kind of engage with people, listen, and also be like a credible person, right? Because, people kind of talk to you. They tell you, hey, I'm working on this like library with lots of templates, like everything falls apart. That's crap. And then, I'm like, okay, look, we need to make this person happy. Can we do that? I really enjoyed that. Definitely learned. That's where I learned a lot about, I would say, kind of content creation. Like, how do you put together a good talk, a good video, a good presentation, a good tutorial? How do you write a blog post? Like all of that kind of stuff. So,
okay, and so how did you learn it? In the sense, like from your colleagues, or do you have any books to recommend or courses, whatever?
Content creation. I imagine there's a lot of ways, like things about that on the internet.
Yes, but what worked for you then specifically?
So at JetBrains, there was there still is a big advocate team. So I was the developer advocate for all of their C++ stuff. But then there was, a bunch of people for like the Java stuff and the .NET stuff and the C# stuff and whatever. And it was a big team. And a lot of the people were very, very experienced. Some of them had been doing this for a decade and they knew everything about microphone setup and lighting and like how screen grabbing and how to use the software like to like record screen videos perfectly and like how to do transitions. And I'm not saying I'm a master in this myself. Like I'm doing a lot less of that kind of stuff now, but I think I just learned from the internal resources that they had, which were pretty good.
Okay, nice. That's actually I didn't know this part of your career. Okay, so are we going to do the inception now and go back to Cradle?
Right. Yeah. So Cradle was fun. So Cradle arose out of an idea where I was working at JetBrains, I was living in St. Petersburg, and then this guy, Matt, contacted me, and he was like, "Hey, I've heard about you. Like, I have this idea." And I was like, "Yeah, sorry, I have a job. I'm busy. Go away." And then he persisted. He was like, "Oh yeah, but like, kind of, do you have any idea how I would make that happen? I'm not really an engineer, but I really want to like make a company that does this thing." And like, he was so persistent that like at some point we became friends, and like he actually talked me through what he wanted to do, and I was like, "Damn, that's a good idea. Let me help you make that happen." And so we got together and founded a company. We also had a couple other co-founders who supplied kind of the capital we needed to actually get anything started. And we started a music tech company, and that was great. So what can I say? It's a company that's still going very strong and growing and doing lots of stuff. And they make very innovative music technology. Currently, they're focusing on tools for kind of music producers, but there's technology to do a lot more. So even though I don't work there like as my day job anymore, I'm kind of very excited about what they're going to be doing in the future. And yeah, this was actually then a good experience of like, okay, now you can start your own business. You can hire your own developers, build your own, tech stack from scratch. And like also like I wrote like the first prototype myself of like the thing that we were building first. And you kind of start from a clean slate. This is kind of, I guess, every developer's dream. And I got to hire the people I wanted to work with, and yeah, it was absolutely amazing. And I kind of fed all of my experience into that. Like, how do you write code sustainably? How do you write code so it doesn't crash all the time? And how do you do testing properly? And how do you build tools that people can use and reuse? And how do you package them up in a way that you figure out all of the complicated bits, you package them up, and you give them to people, and they don't have to worry about it anymore. They can just use it, kind of, that's kind of what company is all about. I think, in my opinion, or kind of like part of the spirit in which it was founded, perhaps. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And I also wanted to build a place where people like to work, right? Where people don't burn out, they don't have to work weekends, but you just do, fun things and are being paid for it, and cool products come out the other end. So, yeah, that was a pretty great experience. I did that as like, I don't know how you call it, CTO or like the main engineering person. Didn't really have job titles, but I would say CTO is probably the most adequate thing. For like about 3 years. Yeah, that was fun. And then I felt like, okay, I think they know what they're doing. I can move on and do something else at this point. But it was a great journey, and I'm very happy that they're still going strong.
Okay, awesome. I believe this is similar to how you were feeling about JUCE, that it's a great place to learn. And then you kind of enabled others at Cradle to have the same experience, right? To kind of learn and grow as C++ audio developers. So I think it's really awesome that, to kind of give back in this way. And can you share which products did you release as Cradle?
Right. So the ones that, were released when I was still involved were like the Prince. That was the first one. It's a very versatile and fun kind of synth plugin. The next one was the God Particle, which is a really, really awesome sounding mixing mastering plugin, kind of developed together with Jason Joshua and kind of his signal chain, big producer. And then the Spirit, which is a vocal processing plugin that we did with Bluebell. So those were like the first three products and the ones I was kind of mainly involved in. And now there's more stuff, but those are the ones that I was involved in.
So now you're a C++ consultant. So can you share what you're working on? Who are you helping to write their C++ code?
So I'm not actually, funny enough, I'm not actually writing any C++ code right now. I'm currently working with a Bloomberg financial company, but I'm not actually writing any code with them or for them. And what I'm doing is, so there is this C++ feature called contracts, or contract assertions, actually, is what we call it these days. It's like assert, but better, basically. And I was involved in, I have been involved in kind of developing that feature for the C++ standard. And so what Bloomberg is doing is they're helping with kind of specifying it, but also implementing it in GCC and Clang. And there's like a kind of a little team with compiler implementers, and I'm kind of acting as, I would say, like a liaison between the compiler engineers, the committee, and like the community, making sure that the feature is like specified. I wrote a lot of papers on this. I wrote a lot of wording on it. So it's kind of basically committee, somewhere in between committee work and compiler work, I guess. But it's kind of, it's language design, right? It's not like a product. So it's kind of this weird niche that I ended up in. I think that, that project is actually coming to an end soon. So this is kind of, we have a committee meeting in Kona coming up in November, where we have another discussion about contracts. And after this, I hope we will have it in C++ 26 and I will be able to move on to something else. So I do actually have another job lined up for another financial company, which is very interesting, but I can't share much about that yet.
This is typical with financial companies.
Yeah, so I kind of left the audio industry for good, I think, at this point. Yeah, so this was fun. This was a lot of standardization work. The next one is going to be more like hands-on C++ again. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, cool. And since you mentioned the committee, I'd really like to discuss your involvement in the ISO C++ standard committee. But before we do this, I really would like to ask, because you mentioned this a couple times already in our conversation, and I believe you gave the foundational talk when it comes to C++ and audio programming. I believe it was in CPPCon in 2015.
Oh, yes, I remember that one. That
was C++ in the audio industry. So Can you share the story of how this came to be? And, I imagine that it spawned the rest of your successful and insightful talks.
So that was interesting because that's not something I kind of, how do I explain this? So I was kind of always into education and like explaining stuff to people. I've always liked that. So actually at NI, there was this internal thing where they had these tech talks, I think every week or every 2 weeks or something like this, where I was regularly contributing. And at the time, C++ 11 was new. So I was like giving internal talks about here's how to use lambdas, here's how to use auto, that kind of stuff. But I had never thought about actually going to an international conference or doing anything publicly like that. That has never really crossed my mind. But then in 2015, when I joined ROLI, there was this whole thing about JUCE, which is obviously a framework that a lot of audio software is being written in. So it kind of has this kind of very special place, I would say, in the music industry. So there was this idea that people involved in this should somehow be a bit more involved in like the C++ audio community kind of more widely. Mm-hmm. So two things came out of that. One is that they decided to send a delegation to CPPCon. So it was me, Jules, Fabian, a couple other people. So there were actually, I think, 5 of us who were sent on company money to CPPCon, and that for me was a huge thing. That was the first time I was doing a big trip for work to the US. That was very exciting. And yeah, they were like, okay, somebody needs to do a talk there. And like, Jules was like, yeah, I don't have time for this. Somehow it ended up with me doing a talk. And then it was like, oh, what should I talk about? And I was like, I don't know anything. And then I think Jules had the idea, just do like a kind of overview. How do we do C++ in the audio? And how do we use C++ in the audio industry? What is specific to what we do, what other C++ developers don't necessarily do in the same way that, don't do audio? Can you just put together an hour with like some typical things that we do? And that was his idea. Mm-hmm. I think the title also he came up with. And then I just did that and that went pretty well. So, I think I was like, yeah, this is cool. I want to keep doing this. And so I've been to CPPCon pretty much every year since then. And I'm currently now also the program chair. So I'm actually responsible for the conference schedule.
Okay, cool. I definitely want to go into this. I just wanted to share a brief anecdote that I remember I was already doing some audio programming from our university projects with JUCE.
Mm.
And I remember watching your talk exactly on YouTube. And that's, I think, the first time when someone mentioned to me, real-time programming, because although there were a lot of people doing DSP at my university, no one has ever mentioned, for example, that you cannot allocate on the audio thread. And it so happened that in my project at that time, there were quite a few allocations on the audio thread. As you know, it doesn't have to always blow up, but it's something that you definitely shouldn't do. And I remember this kind of revelation shining on me that came from your talk. So it's I think it is super valuable nowadays as well. So to anyone that hasn't yet seen it, definitely look it up. And I believe there's also a follow-up, right?
Yeah, there's quite a few follow-ups by now. I'm actually doing a talk at ADC this year again with this kind of stuff. Yeah, so that was really inspiring to me and like heartwarming that this talk was so successful, because like I had no idea it would, be that popular. But then afterwards, a lot of people came to me from like all of these other music tech companies, and they were saying, this is so awesome that like somebody finally talks about this, because I think people haven't not really been doing public kind of talks about this kind of stuff before. So it was really heartwarming. And then I think after this, pretty quickly, other people started doing talks like this. And there's quite a few other names nowadays who have like really good content out there about this kind of like, how do you do real time and like kind of audio programming or low latency programming. So that was very, very cool. I'm very happy I helped to like start a trend there, and it's going strong. So that's really cool. Yeah. So if I can say one thing, I think there's 3 things that came out of this like 2015 phase. One was, the CPPCon thing, which started a series of talks by me and other people, and just in general, this notion that, audio people can talk to other people about what they're doing. Then the second thing that came out of that year was ADC, which actually we kind of started that year as well. So we were like, okay, now, we went to a conference that was very exciting, and like there seems to be a lot of interest across the industry for content. So let's start our own thing, right? This is how ADC was born. And again, everybody said, oh my God, why does this not exist before? And the third thing was that somebody said, maybe somebody should represent the music industry on the C++ committee, because there was nobody from the music industry on the C++ committee. And then, it was kind of like, who wants to do this? And like, Jules, you would be the natural person to do this. And Jules was like, no, I don't want to like, I don't know, be on a committee and like talk about wording all day. That's not interesting. I want to build stuff. And I was like, well, actually, that sounds like really cool. I want to do that. So I got sent there. That was that. Yeah, that's how I ended up on the committee. And then I got stuck there. And yeah.
So, but how did this specifically happen? So, did the companies, did you have contacts already on the committee, and you said, hey, maybe we should include someone from the audio industry? Or is there a formal procedure where you can apply to be?
There was a formal procedure where anybody can join the committee, but it's kind of very strictly regulated. Like if you go to isocpp.org, there is like a page explaining all of that. So basically what you need to do, so ISO is the International Organization for Standardization, right? It's like a big international thing. And then, but what it really is kind of, it's like a switchboard for all like the individual national standardization committees. So like the US has ANSI, and the UK has the BSI, and Germany has DIN, and like all the other countries have their own like standardization organizations. And so what you need to do is you need to join that organization. So whatever country you live in or work in or have the citizenship of or whatever, you have to go to that country's national body for standardization and say, hey, I'm a C++ expert. I want to join. And then every country has their own procedures. In some countries, you can just join and it's for free. In other countries, you have to have a company supporting you and it costs money. And like every country has their own process. But then once you join every country has their own process. Yes. And once you join your country's kind of C++ committee, they can nominate you to represent them on the international committee. And then you can go to the international committee meeting, and then that kind of unlocks everything, and then you're part of the committee, basically. That's roughly how this works. There's a lot more to it than that, but this is kind of it's open to everybody.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. And for me, like I think it's entirely new to learn. So yeah, that's good. I'm curious to see if someone from the audience will join the committee one day. So can you share, maybe, do you focus in the committee on kind of a certain subset of C++ use cases? For example, real-time programming. Although I know that you mentioned contracts, so do you have a kind of philosophy how you approach this?
Yeah, so for the last couple of years, I was very much focusing on contracts because that's also directly related to what I'm currently working on. But like all the years before then, I think I joined the committee in 2016 or something. So I was indeed focusing on things, not necessarily directly low latency and real time, because there isn't really anything in the language specific to that, but kind of things that could be useful for that. Right. So there's all of this atomic and concurrency stuff, which I was always interested in. There's a low latency study group, actually. But also, like, I actually authored a few proposals myself that are directly useful in these kind of scenarios where, you know, you are on a hard deadline. You need to squeeze out like every kind of millisecond, nanosecond from your code. So I standardized attribute assume aligned, which is like very useful when you do like SIMD stuff. Start lifetime as, which is very useful if you just do very kind of manipulate rule bits and bytes, and people do that a lot, and it's all UB, and now you can do slightly more without UB. I was involved in in-place vector, which is like a vector that never allocates. So yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff. And then also just whenever I spotted holes where something just wasn't quite right, I kind of, a little bit like when I was working in JUCE as well, like I just did all of these little things here and there to patch it up and make it better, like wherever I could. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Okay, and is there like a single specific contribution that you're most proud of?
Definitely like contracts, like the work that I have been doing over the last couple of years. I think that's a feature that once C++ 26 is out, which is hopefully going to happen next year, and once that feature ships, I mean, we already have implementations in GCC and Clang. Not yet Microsoft, but hopefully they will get there too. But it's not upstream yet because it's not a standard feature yet. But once that's upstreamed and ships and it's in the standard, I think it will be a feature that people will just use kind of everywhere. Because I think a lot of this like low latency stuff, it's very specific. Like assume aligned is something, you know, once a year you have a use case, like I need this precise tool in this place, right? But contract assertions is something I would expect people to just write all over the place, right? You will have every one of your functions annotated with pre and post, and it will just change how people write code, really, I think, I hope, in a good way. So I'm very proud to have been part of that journey and have contributed to, getting that feature right.
And I think it would be a cool topic to discuss, but I know that you've done already a number of talks on contracts, so we'll definitely link to those and to kind of save a bit of podcast time. But is it the thing that you're the most excited about in C++ 26?
There is maybe one feature that I think will potentially have even more impact, which I was not directly involved in, which is reflection. Okay. I think that's the one feature that is even more powerful, even more cool. I don't think it's going to be quite as pervasive in the sense that everybody's going to use it. I think you will more likely use libraries that internally use reflection. But in terms of what it can do, it's just super powerful. Like, you remember all of these hacks where, you need to convert an enum into a string, or you need to transform an array of structs into a struct of arrays so it's more cache friendly, or, whatever. You serialize, deserialize. Like, all of the stuff becomes just so easy and natural with reflection. And that's just scratching the surface. There's like so much more you can do. I could talk for a whole hour about this. This is very exciting.
Awesome. And is std execution also going to be in C++ 26?
Yes, that is the third thing that I'm excited about.
Okay, awesome.
Although I will say one thing about this. It's very cool. And it's very cool how they kind of separated, what you actually want to do from the topology of how you do it, like on how many threads or on where in your architecture or whatever. But I haven't yet figured out how to map like this typical audio scenario of you start a callback, then you get a callback every 10 milliseconds, and then you kind of so that typical scenario, I haven't yet figured out how to map that on executors, which is not to say that you can't do it. It's just I haven't had the time to sit down and do it because it's not trivial. But I hope maybe somebody else can figure this out.
Okay, cool. Maybe there's a potential conference talk there.
Maybe.
Okay. And can you maybe briefly explain to the uninitiated, how does the committee's work unfold? How do you work on certain C++ features? Right.
So we have meetings every 3 times a year. We have face-to-face meetings, and it's always a week, Monday to Saturday. It's pretty intense. Like you get up really early in the morning and you work until late in the evening because you have just this 1 week with these experts in the same room, right? And so it's organized in a bunch of different study groups and working groups. And yeah, everybody's kind of, nowadays, you can also attend on Zoom, which about a third of the people do. So it's a bit more accessible now, thanks to our experience from the pandemic. But yeah, we have these big meetings 3 times a year. And then in between, there's a mailing list where we bounce ideas off each other. And there are like some study groups do telecons, like in between meetings, where you have maybe an hour or 2 on a Zoom where you meet formally and you kind of, you present. So the idea is people write proposals and then the committee considers them. So all of these telecons and meetings are all about looking at papers people bring to the committee. So the committee doesn't necessarily itself do any work. Like they don't design things. Mm-hmm. Like people design things and propose them, and then they bring them to the committee, and the committee discusses them and votes on them. Of course, the people who work on these things and the people who sit on the committee are often the same people, but like there's a kind of a separation here. Yeah, so the committee considers proposals and votes on them.
Okay, thank you. And is it all voluntary?
Yes, so nobody gets paid for being on the committee. It's basically like all volunteering work. But realistically, like you can't really do it unless you have an employer who supports you, like in terms of you have the time to do it and you have the money to go to the meetings, right? So I guess you could do it in your own time and on your own dime, but almost nobody does. It's quite a commitment. So you kind of need to work at a company that wants you to be a committee member and sponsors that. That's kind of how it works for most people.
Okay, I understand. And the last question about the committee is more personal one. So can you say, how did your work in the standard committee and in all the CPP conferences and other talks, how did this change the way you see and write C++?
Oh, yeah, it has a massive impact. I would say the C++ committee is the single most probably impactful thing that I do, but also the single most like valuable source of knowledge that I have access to. In terms of just the network, like the people you get to hang out with, but also just the kind of things you learn. Like the committee works very fast. Like there's a lot of very, very like intelligent people there who know a lot. And you have this really broad coverage, right? You have people from big tech companies like, Microsoft or Apple. And then you have like people from small companies, people who do something very specific, like build elevators or cars or whatever it is. And you have this really broad kind of like coverage there, or people who teach C++ or whatever it is, people who write compilers, right? Like, so I think it's really helped me to see like how many different platforms and use cases for C++ there really are, and how many different ways of using it there really are. And like how many different hardware architectures there are, like PowerPC or RISC-V are a thing. If you're developing a language, it needs to work on those platforms, right? And how like backwards compatibility is really, really, really important in some cases, but then also not so important in other cases, right? So that's where like different people in the committee have different points of view because they're trying to achieve different things. And so I think I learned a lot about like just kind of the breadth of software engineering, kind of like how there's all of these different trade-offs, different use cases, different platforms, but also how to navigate that. How do you like, because I also have been chairing one of those study groups for the last couple of years. And so that's when you have to actually make people agree on stuff. And I think that was a very, very, very valuable experience in terms of how to navigate human behavior and social dynamics and how to like drive a like group to consensus, right? Because there isn't a boss who can say, okay, we're going to do this now. It's all consensus based. So how do you make people like stubborn engineers agree on one thing? It's very hard. And I think I learned very valuable lessons there.
Okay, awesome. I think it's super interesting, but unfortunately cannot talk more about this for the sake of time. So let's now move to more C++ focused questions.
Right.
And these are, kind of complicated. So I'm going to read them word by word.
Okay.
So the first one is that imagine someone who wants to learn a programming language that will allow them writing real-time audio software.
Yeah.
Can you pitch C++ as the best language for the job? I would just say use Rust. I would not, honestly, if I were to start another software project from scratch these days, I would not use C++. Okay.
I think C++ probably you kind of have to use because people know it, because there's all of these frameworks like JUCE that exist for C++. I think something like JUCE probably doesn't exist for Rust, but it should. And, that's what I would work on, right? I would not necessarily use C++ for a new project in that industry in particular.
Okay.
If I can avoid it, right? I mean, if there's a reason why I have to use C++, it's a very good language, right? But it has its problems, right? It is very complex. It is not memory safe. So I would seriously look into alternatives if I had to, if I were to like learning a new language or starting out in the industry or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Probably not what you wanted to hear, but that's kind of my honest answer.
No, I'm actually quite surprised, but I think it's very valuable to have such an honest answer on this. And but we live in a world when C++ is kind of, I would say, the de facto standard for audio. So what is your opinion then? What's the best way to learn C++ in 2025, especially when it comes to real-time audio programming?
So that is the number one question that I get all the time. And I just really don't have an answer to that. I don't know. Like, I don't know, watch talks, hang out in online communities. I kind of learned it by osmosis in a way. I don't really know how to go about doing that. I know everybody wants to know. I just really don't have the answer.
Okay, that's. I think it's also quite difficult, when you learned it over a decade ago, than to say now, what's the best way to learn.
I mean, a decade ago or a decade and a half ago, it was like, okay, read Scott Meyers, read this, and this, and then watch these talks, and then you're good. But like, it's not like that anymore. I don't really know.
Okay. And, apart from Scott Meyers' book, is there any other resource that you recommend?
So there are a bunch of new books that came out. Unfortunately, I can't recommend them because I haven't read any of them because I don't have time. Mm-hmm. There are lots of online communities, right? So first of all, there is CBPCon. They have a YouTube channel. They have a Back to Basics track where like every year there's like 10 talks about like back to basics. Let's talk about how move semantics works in C++ or how like whatever templates work. That's a really good resource. Those are some of the best teachers on the planet who are explaining these things. It's for free on YouTube. There's also a bunch of other online communities. I think for audio, there's the audioprogrammer.com, which is run by my good friend Josh Hodge. That's a great resource. So I can recommend that one. I don't know. Social media, I guess, there's lots of these online platforms where people hang out and you can ask questions and they will direct you somewhere. I don't really have good answers for this. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, you're not, I guess, in need for learning C++. So at least at the beginner level.
So here's the thing. So C++ evolves quicker than I can learn it. right? So I learn the new stuff, but it grows faster than I learn it. So my relative knowledge of C++ is actually shrinking over time.
Yeah, but this isn't beginner knowledge, right? This isn't beginner knowledge. These aren't just the basics. So
basics I kind of learned on the job. I don't know if that's still a viable path these days. Probably not.
I understand. Okay, and the last question on C++ is that in a lot of your conference talks, you deal with the issues surrounding real-time programming, where the thread communication must be log-free and wait-free. And in your talks, you've said many times how difficult this area is. I even remember last year at ADC, your entire presentation was kind of proposing a solution and then pointing out all of its flaws in the sense that they're not real-time safe. So, seeing that it's so hard to unit test and like this area, and that you basically have to reason about the code from the perspective of instruction ordering, is this even possible to learn real-time audio programming, or is it a futile effort?
Honestly, I got into the stuff because I just find it intellectually interesting to think about these problems. I think that's not something you need to think about, I think, when you're just want to write good audio software. I think things like, I don't know, log-free queues or C clocks or whatever other like tricks, that's something you use, right? Somebody wrote a library and then you just use that library. I would say that's what I would recommend. And then there's a handful of crazy people who kind of dive deep and actually want to figure this out. And if you want to become one of those, go dive deep. But I don't think that's something that, more than a handful of people necessarily need to do day in, day out. I think that we have very good libraries for this kind of stuff.
Okay. And can you share maybe how you learned this real-time audio programming stuff? How did you verify that your code is real-time safe, etc. when you were just, starting out in this field?
I mean, I would say, follow coding guidelines. I don't know, there are these recommendations and talks about what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And then there is now a really cool tool called Real-Time Sanitizer. I think it ships with Clang nowadays, that you can attach to your code. And whenever you do something like allocating memory or like doing a system call on your audio thread, it will actually, error out. And so there is like a compile time component to it, and there's a runtime component to it as well. So that's a really, really good tool, which I wish I had 10 years ago, but we have it now. So go and use it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's leave the realm of C++ questions and conclude with some fun ones related to your workflow. So one thing that occurred to me also, in this interview is that you give talks, you host the CPPcast podcast, you work in the C++ standard committee, you also blog, you write open source software, you host the C++ meetup in Helsinki, as I have learned. And so how are you able to be so generous with your time for the community, and how are you able to manage all this, from the time management perspective or the cognitive perspective?
So that's an interesting question. I'm not able to manage it. That is actually something I realized now that I also have a kid, which is another thing that sucks up a lot of your time in a good way. That I am actually not capable of managing these things. So I'm now actually trying to quite aggressively cut down on the things I do. So I'm kind of starting a new job in December, which is kind of more like a full-time job again. So I have like one thing to focus on, and I'm trying to kind of wind down as many of these other things as I can, because it's just not been very good for my mental health, because it is too much to do at the same time. But yeah, I mean, just to answer your question, how was I able to do this, or how am I able to do this, is that I have a job that is currently, because I'm kind of contracting, I'm very flexible with my time. And I just can't say no, I guess, whenever people say, hey, there is this community thing that somebody needs to do. I just somehow always end up saying, oh yeah, this is something I could do. This has a lot of value for people. And then I get talked into doing it, and then I end up, doing it. So I guess that's how it goes a lot of the time. And then I'm like, oh no, what have I done? So
yeah, I mean, I believe I have the same problem too. So yeah, then I typically say nowadays, let me think about this. And then I go ask my wife, and she says, "But look at all the things that you're doing, and like you can't possibly fit this in."
Yeah.
And then yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So some of the things that you just listed, I actually won't be doing anymore. For example, the Helsinki meetup. There's going to be other people who are very capable who can keep that going, and there's a few other things that probably I won't continue anymore going forward, just to like reduce the amount of things I'm doing, because it reached a level where it really impacts my mental health quite negatively, and I want to just have like fewer things to focus on.
Okay, I understand. So when you're working and you're dealing with all these things, especially the committee work, do you have some daily routine that you follow?
I mean, I guess if you have a small kid, kind of that determines your routine. Yeah, so I found a few things that really helped me, which are going to sound very boring, and you've probably heard them a million times, but they really work, which is meditation, exercise, and healthy food. Those are things that I found, to be very, very, very helpful for, being, healthy, happy, and productive. So one thing I try to do is when I get up in the morning, I don't look at my screen. First thing, I go and like meditate for 20 minutes. So I did actually like a proper course where I learned how to do this. And of course, I'm still learning, but this is something I found very helpful. Then another thing that I found very helpful is that you kind of split your day into two halves. Like you do some stuff in the morning, and then you take a break and you go exercise. So I go for a run. So that kind of splits the day up really nicely. You get to spend some time in the fresh air, and then you come back, you eat lunch, and then you have another few hours in the afternoon. So kind of that's going to be very different from person to person, but that's something that really helps me kind of just split up the day like that. And then have very clear kind of like, I only work from then until then, right? So like if you're like looking at, work emails like late in the evening, that is very, very unhealthy. I would not advise to do that.
Okay, I understand. And I'm super curious because I was also learning about meditation. Is there a specific, art of meditation that you are doing? Because I know there are so many different sorts of meditation practices.
Right. So one thing that I found was really transformative. It really changed my life at a point where I was like really struggling with like anxiety and other kind of mental health issues because of all of the stuff that was going on that I had on my plate. I did this thing called MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is like a standard 8-week course that you can do, I think in any country, they offer that somewhere. And that's like an 8-week course where you have to do like a lot of meditation, but like you have people teaching you how to do it. It's kind of guided. And you do it with other people. So it's also a little bit like group therapy in a way. And I found that to be transformative. So I like, if you're interested, meditation specifically as a way of being less stressed, I highly recommend doing that course, and then you can learn from there. You then can you will know what to do to kind of keep doing it and like learn more, but this is a great starting point.
Okay, awesome. I've been also looking into the works of Jon Kabat-Zinn, so it's very interesting to hear that someone can recommend this.
It changed my life, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. And when you are working, I know you mentioned JetBrains tools, but is there any other part of your tech stack that you really like to use?
I mean, I haven't really written production code in like something like 4 years now, right?
Okay.
But I use C-Line. I'm a Mac person. I use Mac. And then everything else kind of depends on what I need to do in the moment, really.
Okay. And do you listen to music while programming?
Oh, yes. All the time. Yes. A lot. Yeah. It kind of depends. If there's something like really complicated I need to understand, maybe not. But if I'm coding especially, yeah, it's great. I do
Can you mention maybe some genres or bands that you like to listen to?
I have a weird music taste. I'm into kind of, how would I say this? Progressive metal with like lots of odd time signatures and like interesting rhythms and stuff like this. So
awesome.
like kind of Meshuggah, Animals as Leaders, maybe a little bit jazzy as well. Like those kind of bands. And then if sometimes I'm kind of into something more a bit atmospheric, like, I don't know, kind of these post-rock bands, kind of, which is kind of a bit more slow and like a soundscape building, that kind of stuff. But yeah, very much rock and metal, like progressive rock and metal. That's kind of my thing. I don't really, oddly for somebody who worked in the music industry for so long, I never understood electronic music. Mm-hmm. I think because I kind of come from like violin and piano and like guitar, like I always need like a direct kind of, for me, making music is kind of like there's a direct way in which you move your fingers and that directly transitions to some physical object making sound, right? Like a string or something like this. And then you kind of express yourself in that way with your hands. And I never understood how, like, when people like turn knobs or do something on their screen, like to make music, how that, I mean, obviously use that like to mix something or something like this, but like to make music, I never quite understood how that works. It feels like there isn't a direct transition from me doing something with my hand to a particular type of note or tone. Like it's kind of this weird layer in between, which is like the synthesizer or whatever you're using. And I never quite understood that world.
Okay, cool.
I know. Maybe one day I will.
Yeah, but it's awesome to hear that you like progressive metal with odd time signatures. I mean, I'm a huge Dream Theater fan, so.
It used to be my favorite band for many years as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to their concert this year and seeing them with Mike Portnoy. It was really amazing. So
yeah, I saw them live a couple times as well. Like, it's pretty awesome.
Okay, they used to come to my city. They don't anymore, but yeah, we'll see. Maybe that changes. Okay, Timur, thank you so much for this interview. I know you have a lot on your plate, as you said, and I appreciate it all the more. I'm sure that our listeners do as well. It was awesome to hear your journey, how you went from the academia to all the way to C++ committee. And I'm sure that although you haven't mentioned specific, resources or like ways of learning C++ so much, I'm sure that people will get a lot of inspiration to pursue their audio programming career. So thank you. And the question that I think people would like to ask is that if they wanted to contact you, where do you recommend they go?
That's a good one. So I used to be quite active on social media, but I don't do any of that anymore. Like, I discovered that social media is just not good for my mental health at all. So I just don't do social media at all anymore. So you're not going to find me there. I mean, I am kind of in a bunch of online communities. There's the Audio Programmer Discord where you can find me. There's CPP Lang Slack, which you can find me. I can't promise I'll reply like immediately, but like you can find my name. There's some, like, I think I'm Timur Audio in most of these online things where you can like ping me. And if you really look hard in my committee papers, you will also find an email address that you can use to reach me. It's not my primary one, but I will probably read it eventually. I guess that's it really. I try to like keep a low profile these days and stay off social media. But if you really want to find me, you can.
Okay, but I hope to see you then at Audio Developer Conference.
Absolutely, I will be there. I have a talk about memory ordering this year and like how that actually works and what that actually means, and why we need that. So it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it because it's still a topic I don't fully understand. So thank you once again, and I wish you all the best for all your future endeavors.
All right, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, everybody, that was Timur Doumler, a C++ standard committee member, an audio developer, a JUCE C++ framework developer, a CTO of Cradle and a founder of Cradle, and a former employee of companies like Native Instruments or JetBrains. So thank you, Timur, once again for this insightful interview. To you, dear listener, if you want to help the podcast, please consider subscribing to the WolfSound channel on YouTube and giving a thumbs up to this video. Consider also leaving up to a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. and suggest in the comments on YouTube or on the blog who should be the next guest. Just as a reminder, the notes to this episode can be found under thewolfsound.com/talk031. And if you become someone like Timur, if you like to follow his steps and learn audio programming, but you don't know where to start, check out my free audio plugin developer checklist. It lists every bit of knowledge that I believe is necessary to become a full-fledged audio programmer. You can get it at thewolfsound.com/checklist. Thanks again for listening and see you in the next one. Take care.